Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for your insights. The restructuring officer, John Ray, described in detail the absence of audited or reliable financial statements, absolutely no internal controls. Professor Allen, I'd like to ask a few questions about FTX and how they were able to get away with essentially cooking the books. First, was FTX a publicly traded company?
No.
No. As a private company, was FTX required by law to disclose basic information to the public about its business, like audited financial statements?
No.
Was FTX required to disclose transactions with related parties, like Mr. Bankman-Fried's hedge fund called Alameda Research?
No.
And also Mr. O'Leary's example, that would be required to be disclosed. Was FTX required to have a chief financial officer or disclose whether a financial expert was on the board of directors?
No.
Was FTX auditor required to attest to the effectiveness of the company's internal and corporate controls?
No.
And if FTX had been a publicly traded company, would it have been required to make the disclosures and attestations that we've just discussed?
Sorry, I missed that question.
If FTX had been a publicly traded company, would it have been required to make the disclosures and attestations that we've just discussed?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it's just not that FTX is a private company. In fact, just about all the biggest companies in the crypto industry are also privately held. In September, I introduced S4857, the Private Markets Transparency and Accountability Act, which would require the nation's biggest private companies, including FTX, to disclose basic information about their financial condition and comply with basic corporate governance requirements. And according to a letter from the North American Securities Administration, this legislation, in their words, would have made it easier for all of us to spot or prevent the alleged fraud and other misconduct at FTX earlier. So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to include this letter in the record.
Without objection, Sword.
Yeah. The whole point is that we've all talked about the need for regulation, and I think that's obvious. And we have many mechanisms pending here in the Senate and the House to do that. We just have to move quickly. I would suggest this is a good place to start. And a final question, Professor Allen. Do you think that would have helped illuminate what was going on at FTX?
Yes, I think so. I mean, attestations and proof of reserves and other forms of accounting disclosures common in the crypto industry, they don't include the rigor, the independence, and the professional skepticism we get from auditors. But I would note that we should be wary of FASB's moves to implement fair value accounting for crypto assets, because accepting market valuations from the crypto industry could potentially undermine the value of the audit function, and that's something to be wary of.
Thank you very, very much. When we talk about crypto tokens, in fact, it's reported that FTX held about $900 million in liquid assets and $9 billion in liabilities when it failed. And the vast majority of FTX assets were illiquid cryptocurrencies created and promoted by FTX and Alameda. And the company held them at wildly optimistic valuations that turned out to bear little resemblance to reality. Can you explain how aggressive valuation practices contributed to the failure of FTX and put customers at risk, Professor?
Sure. As I outlined in my written testimony, many crypto assets are created out of thin air, and there's no real basis for their valuation. There's simply no way to perform a sanity check on the valuations that are provided, as those assets trade entirely on sentiment. And so when assets trade entirely on sentiment, meaning what other people think they're worth, that creates a space where a significant amount of leverage can be created and fraud can easily go undetected.
Thank you very much. Again, I think the one theme that seems to be consistent is that the need to regulate not just this industry, but private entities that are controlling a huge amount of funds that are investing in ways that are not obvious to the public or even to their own shareholders or equity owners. And we have to move, and I would suggest as a starting place, the legislation I proposed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.